It wouldn't surprise me, though he didn't say so, if he had in mind the premature death of the steel worker that taught him about the real world when he was a teenager. Now, that steel worker didn't literally commit suicide, as far as we know, but he died quickly after having been discarded to the trash heap, and that's very far from an isolated case. We can add his and many similar deaths to the colossal toll of the institutional crimes of state capitalism. There are poignant studies of the indignation and the rage of those who have been cast aside as the state corporate programs of financialization and deindustrialization have closed plants, destroyed families and communities. Incidentally, rather similar studies of similar reactions in Chinese areas, sometimes called the Rust Belt, where similar things are happening. These reveal the sense of acute betrayal on the part of working people who believed that they had fulfilled their duty to society in a kind of a moral compact with business and government, only to discover that they were just instruments of power and profit, cast aside when they were no longer useful. These are truisms from which they had been carefully protected by the doctrinal institutions. While reading Joe Stack's manifesto and all other stuff like it, I do find myself recovering childhood memories and a lot more that I didn't understand at that time. The Weimar Republic, Germany, was 20s and early 30s. That was the peak of Western civilization. It's worth remembering that. In the sciences, the arts, and literature, it was also regarded as a model of democracy. Through the 1920s, the traditional ruling parties, the liberal and conservative parties, they entered into decline, inexorable decline. And so that was well before the process was intensified by the Great Depression. In 1925, General Hindenburg, Prussian aristocrat, was elected president, and the coalition that elected him was pretty similar to the mass base that swept Hitler into office 8 years later, that compelled the aristocratic Hindenburg to select as chancellor what he called the little corporal, who he despised, but he had to do it because of the mass support. As late as 1928, the Nazis had less than 3% of the vote. 2 years after that, the most respectable Berlin press was lamenting the sight, I'll quote them, of the many millions in this highly civilized country who had given their vote to the commonest, hollowest, and crudest charlatanism. The public was becoming disgusted with the incessant wrangling of Weimar politics, democratic parliamentary politics, and the service of the traditional parties to powerful interests, and their failure to deal with popular grievances. And at the same time, they were being drawn by persuasive forces that were dedicated to upholding the greatness of the nation and defending it against invented threats in a revitalized, armed, unified state which was marching on to a glorious future led by the charismatic figure who was carrying out what he called the will of eternal providence, the creator of the universe. That's the way he orated to the mesmerized masses. These are these speeches I was hearing and not understanding, but sort of grasping in some sense back in the mid-30s. By May 1933, the Nazis had largely destroyed not only the traditional ruling parties, but also the huge working class parties, and they were enormous, and also their associations, which were very powerful and rich. They were gone within a few years. The Nazis declared May Day 1933 to be a workers' holiday, first time. That was what the big left parties had never been able to achieve. And many working people took part in the enormous patriotic demonstrations on May Day 1933, more than 1 million people estimated in the heart of what was called Red Berlin, left-wing working-class city. They joined farmers, artisans, shopkeepers, petty bourgeois, paramilitary forces, Christian organizations, athletic clubs, military clubs, and the whole rest of the coalition that was coalescing as the center very quickly collapsed. By the onset of the war, probably 90% of Germans were marching enthusiastically with the brown shirts. Well, the world's too complex for history to repeat, but there are some unpleasant memories reverberating, and there are lessons to keep in mind. I'll have to expand on them. For those who want to choose the vocation of critical intellectuals, there's no shortage of tasks. That's true whatever their station in life, whether they're called intellectuals or not. They can sweep away, they can try to sweep away the mists of carefully contrived illusion and reveal the stark reality, which is often quite simple when you clear away the mists. They can become engaged directly in popular struggles. They can help organize the countless Joe Stacks who are destroying themselves and maybe the world, and they could join them in leading the way to a better future. Thanks.